When you occupy the office of the U.S. President, you are labeled the leader of the free world, but it is not without its perils. Historically, it has also made you a target for extremists who do not share your views and values. You may recognize the faces and names of the 4 men who assassinated U.S. presidents: John Wilkes Booth, Charles J. Guiteau, Leon Czolgosz, and Lee Harvey Oswald, as these were high-profile front-page stories of their time. Lesser publicized were the 8 other documented unsuccessful presidential assassination attempts. Fate was kind, and thankfully these attempts were unsuccessful, however, did occur and remain part of the American story. This short video profiles the events and individuals associated with the lesser-known presidential assassination attempts. As a byproduct, we hope it provides a better understanding of the motives behind these criminal incidents. When considered in total, there have been 12 assassination incidents in U.S. history, 4 provided fatal and 8 unsuccessful. As such, the frequency of these attempts represents a clear and present danger for the sitting U.S. president, especially at a time when America is so clearly divided on its views and values. Moreover, on the global front, other developed nations are uniting to challenge democracy as a way of governance. This movement is just another variable that can result in increased threats against the office of the U.S. president. Let's begin with a recap of the 4 fatal incidents. John Wilkes Booth was born May 10, 1838, in Bel Air, Maryland, to his parents Junius Brutus Booth and Mary Ann Holmes. Raised in a family of actors, Booth developed a passion for the theater and often performed alongside his family members. He was largely self-educated. Booth was a skilled actor, known for his performances in Shakespearean plays. Politically, Booth was a fervent supporter of the Confederacy. Booth believed killing Lincoln would aid the South's cause. On April 14, 1865, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., he shot and killed President Lincoln. After a long pursuit, Booth was shot and killed by Federal soldiers on April 26, 1865, in a barn near Port Royal, Virginia, after refusing to surrender. It was later discovered that Booth was involved in a conspiracy to assassinate not only President Lincoln but also Vice President Andrew Johnson and Secretary of State William Seward on the same night. Charles J. Guiteau was born in Freeport, Illinois, on September 8, 1841, to parents Luther Wilson Guiteau and Jane Howe. Guiteau struggled with mental health issues and exhibited erratic behavior during his adolescence. He attended various schools and attempted law school but never completed his studies. Guiteau was a self-proclaimed lawyer, writer, and preacher, though he faced criticism for his lack of credentials. Guiteau believed his support for Garfield's election had not been adequately rewarded with a government position. On July 2, 1881, at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C., he shot and killed then-President James Garfield. In Washington, D.C., during Guiteau's trial, he tried to argue he was legally insane at the time, but the jury ultimately rejected that defense. Charles Guiteau was subsequently executed by hanging on June 30, 1882, in Washington, D.C. Leon Czolgosz was born in Alpena, Michigan, on May 5, 1873, to his parents Paul Czolgosz and mother Mary Nowak. As a young man, Czolgosz struggled with unemployment and radical political beliefs. He received limited formal education and had a sporadic employment history. Politically, Czolgosz was influenced by anarchist ideology and believed that violence could lead to social change. Driven by his anarchist beliefs, Czolgosz sought to eliminate political leaders he viewed as oppressive. Czolgosz's anarchist beliefs were influenced by a speech given by the radical anarchist Emma Goldman. However, Goldman later disavowed any connection to Czolgosz's violent actions and condemned his assassination of President McKinley. On September 6, 1901, at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, he shot and killed President William McKinley. Leon Czolgosz was later executed by electric chair on October 29, 1901, in Auburn, New York. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, on October 18, 1939, to his parents Robert Edward Lee Oswald and his mother Marguerite Clavery, Oswald had a troubled upbringing and faced challenges in school and family life. Oswald attended various schools and was a self-taught Marxist. He defected to the Soviet Union and returned to the U.S. with mixed ideologies, expressing political disillusionment and opposition to the U.S. government. On November 22, 1963, in Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas, he fatally shot and killed President John F. Kennedy. In turn, Lee Harvey Oswald was later shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby on November 24, 1963, while in police custody.
Now let's turn our attention to the 8 unsuccessful assassination attempts on a U.S. president. Richard Lawrence was born in Sutton, England, in the year 1800. From a long history of mental instability, Lawrence became convinced he was not receiving money he was owed because of opposition by President Andrew Jackson. At the age of 35, on January 30, 1835, he attempted to assassinate President Andrew Jackson on the footsteps of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. Lawrence attempted to shoot President Jackson with 2 pistols, but both misfired. Jackson responded by attacking Lawrence with his cane. Lawrence was found not guilty by reason of insanity and spent the rest of his life in mental institutions. He died on June 13, 1861, at the Government Hospital for the Insane in Washington, D.C. John Schrank was born in Bavaria, Germany, in the year 1876. On October 14, 1912, at the age of 36, he shot President Theodore Roosevelt in the chest while he was giving a speech. The bullet was slowed down by Roosevelt's folded-up speech and eyeglasses case in his breast pocket, preventing a more serious wound. The president made a full recovery. John Schrank spent the remainder of his life in mental institutions and died of natural causes on September 15, 1943, in Wisconsin State Mental Hospital. Giuseppe Zangara was born in Calabria, Italy, on September 7, 1900. He was 33 when on February 15, 1933, he attempted to shoot President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt at Bayfront Park, Miami, Florida. His shot missed the president and instead wounded Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak. Cermak later died from his injuries. He was apprehended and sentenced to 80 years in prison for the attempt on the president. For the killing of Mayor Cermak, he was executed by electric chair on March 20, 1933, at the Florida State Prison. Oscar Collazo was born in Juncos, Puerto Rico, in 1914. At the age of 18, Collazo participated in a demonstration commemorating José de Diego, a leader of the Puerto Rico independence movement. He was greatly influenced by the event's speaker, Pedro Albizu Campos, the president of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party. So impressed was Collazo that he immediately joined the Nationalist Party and devoted himself to it. He would later move to New York City, where he met and befriended Gracilio Torrezola during the Nationalist Party's New York chapter. The Nationalist Party, under the leadership of Pedro Albizu Campos, orchestrated several uprisings both on the island of Puerto Rico and stateside. Collazo and Torrezola collaborated on their attempt to kill President Harry Truman. They traveled from New York City to Washington, D.C. Upon learning that President Truman was staying at the Blair House while the White House was undergoing repairs, they rationalized that there would be less security at the Blair House and proceeded with their plan, both armed with guns. During the attempt, Gracilio Torrezola was fatally shot by a federal officer. Oscar Collazo was shot in the chest but survived the shooting. Collazo was subsequently convicted and imprisoned. When asked about his motive, Collazo replied that the attack on President Truman wasn't personal, but rather an attack on the system. On September 6, 1979, President Jimmy Carter commuted his sentence to time served after Collazo had spent 29 years in prison. He was released and allowed to return to Puerto Rico. On February 21, 1994, Collazo died of a stroke in Vega Baja, Puerto Rico, at the age of 80. Lynette Squeaky was born in Sacramento, California, in October 1948. By 1967, at the age of 19, had dropped out of college. She went to Venice Beach after her parents threw her out of the family house. Homeless and suffering from depression, there was a chance encounter with Charles Manson as he exited a bus, who had just been released from prison. She found Manson's philosophies appealing. This encounter marked the beginning of her allegiance to the Manson family. On the morning of September 5, 1975, went to Sacramento's Capitol Park, ostensibly to plead with President Gerald Ford about the plight of the California redwoods, but armed with a .45 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Pointed the gun at Ford and was immediately restrained by a Secret Service agent before it was fired. Refused to cooperate with her own defense during her trial. Despite claiming, "I was not determined to kill the guy." Was eventually convicted of the attempted assassination of the president and received a life sentence. She was released on parole from Federal Medical Center, Carswell, on August 14, 2009, and moved to Marcy, New York, where she currently resides. Sarah Jane Moore was born in 1930 in Charleston, West Virginia. Moore had been a nursing school student, a Women's Army Corps recruit, and an accountant. Divorced 5 times, she had 4 children before she turned to revolutionary politics. Reportedly having had an obsession with Patricia Hearst, while serving as an FBI informant, Moore became a volunteer bookkeeper for the organization, People in Need, formed by Randolph Hearst, the father of Patricia Hearst. Moore's assassination attempt took place in San Francisco on September 22, 1975, just 17 days after Lynette Squeaky's attempted assassination of Ford. She had been picked up by police on an illegal handgun charge the day prior to the Ford incident, but was released. She was standing in the crowd across the street from the St. Francis Hotel, and was about 40 feet from Ford when she fired a single shot at him with a .38 caliber revolver. Upon realizing she had missed, Moore raised her arm again, but an ex-Marine, Oliver Sipple, grabbed her arm, possibly saving Ford's life. But during the scuffle, a second shot went off and hit a taxi driver. Moore pleaded guilty to the attempted assassination. In 1975, Moore was given a life sentence. She was released from prison on December 31, 2007, after serving 32 years. She would later state she was blinded by her radical political views. In February 2019, Moore was arrested for violating her parole by failing to advise her parole officer of an overseas trip. She was subsequently released in August 2019. As of August 2023, Sarah Jane Moore is still alive. John Hinckley Jr. was born in Ardmore, Oklahoma, in 1955. His father was John Warnock Hinckley, the founder and chief executive of the Vanderbilt Energy Corporation. In 1973, the family relocated to Colorado. Hinckley was an off-and-on student at Texas Tech University from 1974 to 1980, but eventually dropped out. In 1975, he went to Los Angeles in the hope of becoming a songwriter. While there, Hinckley became obsessed with the 1976 film Taxi Driver, where a disturbed protagonist, played by actor Robert De Niro, who plots to assassinate a presidential candidate. The film co-starred Jodie Foster, who was 12 years old at the time. He developed a fixation with Jodie Foster and stalked her, following her to Connecticut when she entered Yale University. Hinckley was seeking fame to impress actress Jodie Foster. Hinckley also trailed President Jimmy Carter from state to state and was arrested in Nashville, Tennessee, on a firearms charge. Penniless, he returned home and despite receiving psychiatric treatment for depression, his mental health did not improve. He then turned his attention to the newly elected President Ronald Reagan. On March 30, 1981, at 2:27 p.m. Hinckley fired a revolver 6 times at Reagan as he left the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Though Hinckley did not hit Reagan directly, the president was seriously wounded when a bullet ricocheted off the side of the presidential limousine, hitting him in the chest. A bullet hit White House Press Secretary Brady on the right side of his head, and Brady endured a long recuperation period. The wound left Brady paralyzed on the left side of his body until his death on August 4, 2014. On June 21, 1982, Brady's death was ruled a homicide 33 years after the shooting. However, on both counts of the assassination attempt and the murder of Brady, Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Congress subsequently passed a law, the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984, stipulating the insanity test was to be used in all federal criminal trials. Hinckley was admitted at St. Elizabeth Hospital in Washington, D.C. Testing concluded he was an unpredictably dangerous man who might harm himself or any third party. 34 years later, in 2016, a federal judge ruled Hinckley could be released from psychiatric care as he was no longer considered a threat to himself or others, albeit with many conditions. The removal of all restrictions was subsequently approved by a federal judge with effect June 15, 2022. Today, Hinckley maintains a YouTube channel to showcase his music. Vladimir Aratunian, a Georgian citizen and ethnic Armenian, was born on March 12, 1978, in Tbilisi, Soviet Georgia. Aratunian lost his father at an early age and lived with his mother. They lived in one of the poorest suburbs of Tbilisi. After completing his secondary education, he had no fixed occupation. He joined the Revival Party in the same month Mikhail Saakashvili became president of Georgia and had led Adjara into a crisis by refusing to obey the central government authorities. Saakashvili and his party were considered to be pro-United States, while Abashids and his party were considered to be pro-Russia. The crisis ended in 2004 without bloodshed. On May 10, 2005, Aratunian waited for United States President George W. Bush and Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili to speak in Tbilisi's Central Liberty Square. When Bush began speaking, Aratunian threw a Soviet-made hand grenade, wrapped in a red tartan handkerchief, toward the podium where Bush stood as he addressed the crowd. The grenade landed approximately 18 meters from the podium, near where Saakashvili, his wife Sandra Rolofs, Laura Bush, and other officials were seated. The grenade failed to detonate. Although original reports indicated that the grenade was not live, it was later revealed that it was. After Aratunian pulled the pin and threw the grenade, it hit a girl, cushioning its impact. The red handkerchief remained wrapped around the grenade, and it prevented the striker lever from releasing. A Georgian security officer quickly removed the grenade, and Aratunian disappeared. Bush and Saakashvili did not learn of the incident until after the rally. At the request of the Georgian government, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation began an investigation into the incident. On July 18, 2005, Georgia's Interior Minister Vano Merabishvili issued photos of an unidentified suspect and announced a reward the equivalent of $80,000 for information leading to the suspect's identification. On July 20, 2005, acting on a tip from a hotline, police raided Aratunian's home. A gunfight ensued. Aratunian killed the head of the Interior Ministry's counterintelligence department. He then fled into the woods in the village of Vashlajvari on the outskirts of Tbilisi, but was suffering from a leg wound and was captured by Georgia's anti-terror unit. DNA samples from Aratunian matched the DNA samples from the handkerchief used to wrap the grenade. Georgian police later found a chemical lab and a stockpile of explosives, chemicals, and other material Aratunian had built up in his apartment, and enough dangerous substances to carry out several terrorist acts. Aratunian admitted from his hospital bed he had thrown the grenade. He said he attempted to assassinate both presidents because he hated Georgia's new government for being a puppet of the United States. He further stated that he did not regret what he did and would do it again if he had the chance. On January 11, 2006, a Georgian court sentenced Aratunian to life imprisonment for the attempted assassination of George Bush and Mikhail Saakashvili and the killing of an officer. In September 2005, a United States federal grand jury also indicted Aratunian and could ask to extradite him if he is ever released. He is not eligible for parole and could only be released under a presidential pardon. However, such pardons are almost never granted in Georgia.